Hello, I welcome you once again to the Indigenous Hands, the Indigenous Voices, brought to you by Save the Deaf and Endangered Languages Initiative. And today we are continuing our discussion on what happened to African Sign Languages. Remember, we've been taking this discussion all the way back from the pre-colonial time, and we have seen what happened to African Sign Languages in the colonial time. And last week we talked about immediately after the colonial time, the advent of Reverend Dr. Andrew Foster, who came to Africa as African American deaf man and a missionary with the heart to bring deaf education to Africa. And we saw what enormous work he did, really how he was able to standardize deaf education in many African countries, working with the government and to make sure that deaf children in Africa got education. Not only just getting education also, but get education through signing. And we mentioned that Dr. Foster came to Africa even around the time when oralism was the method of teaching, and he introduced the total communication method in teaching the deaf children in Africa. But like our discussion has been focused on the sign languages of Africa, and you find out that we are looking at what the impact of his work to African Sign Languages, how did that result, and what did that come up to be. So today our topic is what became of African Sign Languages. What became of African Sign Languages. And we want to go ahead to look at the countries that benefited from the work of Dr. Foster, the countries where he taught, the countries where he established schools. Remember, our record says that he established about 32 schools in about 13 African countries. And that does not mean that those are the African countries that he visited alone. He visited all the African countries, being a deaf advocate, raising deaf people to stand up to their rights. So a lot of African deaf persons were highly influenced by him. He became mentor to a lot of them. Now, going back to the countries that benefited from from the Dr. Andrew Foster's work, the African countries, what we want to look at is what has become of their sign languages. What has become of the sign languages of these countries? If you go to the list of the countries that he worked and established schools, in West Africa alone, we have Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, we have Niger, Chad, we have Liberia, we have Cote d'Ivoire in West Africa alone. And I want you to note that some of these countries are French-speaking countries. Dr. Foster was able to penetrate them and was able to have access to the deaf children and establish schools in them. If you go beyond the West Africa and get into the Central stroke East African countries, you are going to have Burundi, Cameroon, you have the Rwanda, you have Kenya, you have the DRC, which is a Democratic Republic of Congo. These are the countries that Dr. Foster had something to do with the deaf children. Then going to the North Africa, you have Ethiopia. Dr. Foster also traveled to Ethiopia and established school. And what happened to the sign languages of these countries? If you go to search about sign languages in Africa, all these countries, each one of them has something to do, their sign languages have something to do with ASL. Their sign languages have something to do with signed English. That is what became of African Sign Languages after Dr. Foster. Take for instance Nigeria. In Nigerian deaf schools, the sign language that is used officially for deaf education is that we have called the school sign, is that has a structure of English language and has the ASL vocabulary mixed up with some local vocabularies. And that is a sign language an average Nigerian deaf person that went to school uses. That is the sign language that an average sign language interpreter in Nigeria uses. If you go to Ghana, Ghana has a dictionary of sign language, which is the Ghanaian Sign Language, GSL. If you look at the dictionary, it is based on ASL. Many of these African countries, even the Francophone countries, we heard that the sign language in Gabon is of 3 types. They have the ASL-based sign language, they have the French-based sign language, and then they have the indigenous sign languages. This is what is going on in all these African countries visited by Dr. Andrew Foster. Now, outside Dr. Foster's visit and the work he did, there is an introduction of other foreign sign languages in other countries, including those that Dr. Foster visited. There is British Sign Language in South Africa. There is a presence of British Sign Language in Kenya. There is a presence of Portuguese Sign Language. There is a presence of other sign languages that you can name that are foreign in some of these African countries. When you ask what became of African Sign Languages, this is an idea what really became of African Sign Languages. And going by this whole scenario that played out, that brought us where we are in terms of sign languages in Africa, the question we're asking today is, are African Sign Languages created? Are African Sign Languages invented? Are they natural or are they artificial? Why do we ask this question? One general theory that cuts across linguists believe that human languages are not created. Human natural languages are not invented. If it is a human language, it develops and grows from the community that owns it. And every language is as old as the linguistic community that owns it. And let's go back to look at the sign languages in these African countries. If sign English, for instance, is a basic language or sign language or means of communication used to teach deaf children in schools in countries like Nigeria. And sign English has been known to not be a language or a natural language, but a means of communication that is invented, that is created to serve communication purpose in English-speaking countries. That is to say that sign English is not ASL. Of course, every signed language linguist knows that. ASL is a natural language of its own. Why? Because it grew up, it developed from the community of deaf signers. Now, if you go back to Africa, you look at what is going on in all these countries. Each one of them coming up with a form of sign language that is not native it is not necessarily indigenous, and it is not natural. If you go back to Africa to look at all these countries and what happens to the sign languages that are being used in these different African countries that benefited from Dr. Andrew Foster's work, you find out that the variety of sign language that resulted into what we are seeing today, these sign languages have everything to do with either English or ASL. And the most fascinating part of it is even the French-speaking countries, even the Francophone countries, you see that they have sign languages that have something to do with ASL. And that is why when you see Liberia, you see sign language in Liberia based on ASL. You see Senegal, you see based on ASL. You see Nigeria based on ASL. Ghana based on ASL. And what we are saying is, if all these languages of the deaf communities became what is based on a foreign sign language, is that the product that is now what is known as the school sign or the urban sign, is it natural? Or was it invented? Was it created? Now, if you go back also, drop this that is happening in the urban, go back to the rural areas, go back to the communities, you find out that the sign language that is being used by the deaf people in the communities, each one of them stands out to be different, to look different, to have a different communication perspective, a different communication structure from what is going on in the schools. And that is why we are talking about the indigenous voices. They are from the people. Today we are talking about Africa realizing, Africa recovering what it had lost during the colonial times. And if Africa has to stand up to recover, to realize what was lost in the colonial times, it will start from that was mostly attacked. And what was mostly attacked? Our communication systems. Our communication systems are the systems that involve our languages and cultures. Later on in this discussion series, we are going to be looking at the different types of indigenous sign languages that we have and how they are being developed or how they emerged from the people. The roles that hearing people play, the roles that even gestures play. You are going to see how natural they look. And you are going to see how the people, even unconsciously, contribute to their development. But those developments rather, have been so slow because of the presence of the foreign sign language, because of the presence of the made up school signs that became the product of deaf education. And if Africa has to stand up, realize and recover what was lost in the colonial times, every member of the community has to be involved. And what I mean by every member of the community is the different communities that make up African community. And deaf people are one of those communities. Deaf communities are among those communities. And if we look at how our communication systems are designed naturally, you will find out that both signing systems and gestures and speeches, they overlap. They overlap. This is why we come here every week to discuss the indigenous hands, the indigenous voices. Today, we are looking at the question, are African Sign Languages created? Are they invented? Are they artificial? Or are they natural? To answer the question from one perspective, if we are talking about the indigenous African Sign Languages, they are natural, they are not created. If we are talking about the urban sign languages that became the sign languages used in school and all that make them up, we begin to wonder if they were invented, if they were created. We begin to wonder if they are the languages that represent the people. Africa must recover those things that were lost in the colonial time. And for Africa to do that, it will start from that which was mostly attacked. And what is that that was mostly attacked? Our communication system, which embodies our culture, our language, the way we do our things, the way we present ourselves. This was robbed off of us. This was taken away from us. And so we are asking you to pay attention to each piece of these discussions, because they have meanings that transcend beyond the sign languages that we are talking about. They touch every bit of our communication system. Because when you say it is about the deaf, it's about the sign languages alone. No, we are talking about the entire communication system, but looking at it from the sign languages. So as we go on, this discussion is going to take us into dissecting the indigenous sign languages of African continent that we know, and we are going to be asking you to record words and expressions from your sign languages and send to us if you are interested in participating in this program. But until then, pay attention to what we are saying on this platform. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't done that, and activate the notification so that you can get our video every week that we release one. We pray to be steadfast in what we are doing to advocate for the indigenous voices, the indigenous hands, to advocate for the indigenous African sign languages. I will see you next week. Bye.